Welcome to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. My name is Andrew Garrison. This is a show where we talk about sports in the state of Indiana, and it is a confusing day to be a fan of sports in the state of Indiana. We have a lot to talk about today. It is Monday, January 6, 2025. This episode will likely come out on Tuesday, January 7th, 2025. And first and foremost, we're going to talk about a result that occurred about a week ago, just a little bit less than a week ago. And that's Notre Dame. We're going to talk about Notre Dame. They knocked off Georgia in the quarterfinals of the College Football Playoff. We're going to talk about that first. Then we're going to get into the Colts. We technically had a game on Sunday. It was against the Jacksonville Jaguars at home. The Colts won in overtime, but we don't really care because there's a lot of big picture issues that take precedent over the game at hand. So we'll talk about the Colts next. We'll talk about the Pacers. They've made it back to 500. They grabbed a pair of wins. They beat the Suns most recently on Sunday. We'll talk about that. Talk about Indiana basketball and how they are picking up a few more wins, really getting rolling in conference play and bolstering their NCAA tournament resume. And then we're just going to talk about the College Football Quarterfinals as a whole. We're going to talk about the College Football Playoff. We're going to talk about those 8 teams. We're going to talk about the 4 remaining. The 4 games that we saw in the last round, talk about the 4 teams that are moving on to the next round. And then we're all set for this episode. I'm looking forward to having these episodes come out every Tuesday and every Thursday. So I just happen to be recording early today, but this episode will likely come out again on Tuesday. Let's talk about Notre Dame because Marcus Freeman, to me, has now officially fully elevated Notre Dame to a level that it had not quite been at yet before they beat Georgia. They knocked off Georgia. They really did it in the quarterfinals of the College Football Playoff. We talked about this being a sort of a barrier in the past, right? And what I mean by that is Notre Dame twice made the 4-team College Football Playoff, and twice they got blown away, right? Once to Alabama, once to Clemson, they got blown away. So to everyone kind of in the college football world, the conversation was, especially during the Brian Kelly years, that Notre Dame was great, right? Fantastic program, incredible, great teams. They produce great teams, great results. Play a schedule that, whether you consider it easy or difficult or whatever you consider the schedule to be, right? They waltz through it, and then if they are undefeated, maybe they're in the playoff. If they have one loss, which they often did, they're probably not. But once they get to the playoff, they just can't contend with those teams that will say play in conference championship games, like teams from the SEC or the Big Ten, or I suppose the ACC as well, if you want to involve Clemson in that conversation. So that was the conversation around Notre Dame. Now, yes, technically those are all semifinal games, and technically those were all, of course, games that they lost, and of course, technically this year in the 12-team playoff, the quarterfinals isn't where there's 4 teams left. So technically they haven't won a game in advance to a round that they had not been at before. But in a different vein, they kind of have, right? Georgia, number 2 team in the country. Not just the number 2 seed, but the number 2 team in the country, officially according to the playoff rankings. Notre Dame was number 5. So this felt like a semifinal game. It felt like the quality of play and then the level of a semifinal game. And Notre Dame won. And Notre Dame won handedly, and Notre Dame dominated Georgia, the SEC champions, right, from the SEC. Very similar to a game in a position that they would be in years ago in the 4-team College Football Playoff where Notre Dame would lose and they would get blown away. This time it was the opposite. Not only did they win, they dominated and they cruised to a victory. Now, of course, Georgia didn't have their starting quarterback, but I personally don't care because I think Georgia is still fantastic. I think that program is still fantastic, and I think the 24-25 team that they put together is still fantastic, and Gunnar Stockton is still pretty good in his own right. So Notre Dame broke through that barrier that we kind of set for them as a program when it comes to the College Football Playoff. How did they do it? Let's talk about defense first. Notre Dame's pass rush did exactly what we said they needed to do. They got to Gunnar Stockton right away. They forced 2 fumbles. Both were from Gunnar Stockton. They had 4 sacks, 9 tackles for losses. Notre Dame front 7 was picture perfect from start to finish, in my opinion, especially when it came to flustering that young quarterback, right? Because Carson Beck is one of the best in the country, and he's probably going to go to the NFL and be one of the most highly drafted in the country. But Gunnar Stockton is, at the end of the day, still a very highly recruited guy, and at the end of the day, still a top 2 quarterback at the University of Georgia. But still, Gunnar Stockton is young. He's inexperienced. His only game experience in college at Georgia was, of course, against Texas in the SEC championship game, who still is in the Final Four, right? And then again, Notre Dame. So the two teams that he's ever played against, or at least partially, are both in the semifinals of the college football playoff. Notre Dame's front seven, and really Marcus Freeman, this Notre Dame coaching staff, understood right away that you had to get to Gunnar Stockton, because once you flood Gunnar Stockton, you're going to fluster him and you're going to put him in a situation where he's going to make bad throws. And on the flip side, the secondary was very effective too, because when Gunnar Stockton was put in scenarios where he had to get the ball out, he really had no opportunity, because we know that Notre Dame's strength on defense is their secondary, despite the injuries that they've suffered throughout the year. The secondary as a whole had 5 pass deflections. It was always going to be tough on Stockton in this game, because the Notre Dame secondary was just going to restrict the space. It's not even about picking off passes necessarily. It's about restricting the amount of space that those receivers had. Those receivers couldn't create as much separation as maybe they normally would. And I don't even want to say as much as they normally would, but the point is that Gunnar Stockton at the end of the day is facing one of the top 5 secondaries, one of the top 5 pass defenses in the country, and he's getting blitzed down after down, right? Every critical down, it felt like Gunnar Stockton was under fire. And the second he has an opportunity to throw the ball, who is he going to throw it to? Because Notre Dame's secondary, again, is all over those Georgia receivers. And it wasn't like that all game long. And Gunnar Stockton still honestly managed that very well. But the pass rush was limiting the amount of time Stockton had to throw, and the secondary was restricting his options that he had to throw to. It was complimentary defense, it was complimentary football, and it was absolutely beautiful from Notre Dame. Now on offense, what if I told you that the key to Notre Dame winning this game on offense was not Jeremiah Love? In my opinion, it was Riley Leonard. Because Riley Leonard showed in this game that he truly is a true dual threat quarterback, and he puzzled this defense entirely. Again, what if I told you that they didn't need Jeremiah Love to win? He had 90 yards. Riley Leonard had 90 yards through the air. He had 80 yards on the ground, but he was effective because he had both. He mentally split the defense, and that's really the method of attack, perhaps, that these dual threat quarterbacks have against very strong opposing defenses. Because if Georgia was going to focus on the run, right, if they were going to focus on containing Riley Leonard, he said, all right, if you're going to do that effectively, you're going to have to take some defenders out of your pass coverage, so I'm just going to throw it into the space that you left. If they commit to the run when it comes to Jeremiah Love, then sure, maybe you crash inside and you stop Jeremiah Love, but maybe Riley Leonard keeps him himself, and whether he's throwing it or whether he's keeping it for a run in his own right, that's another, just something else you have to think about. So Georgia mentally was split defensively across all of those possible methods of attack, where Notre Dame would say, all right, maybe we're going to throw the ball downfield. Maybe we're going to keep it with Riley Leonard. Maybe we're going to hand it off to Jeremiah Love. You legitimately have to worry about all three, because we can fully move down the field and fully score and fully beat you with all three. And that's exactly what Notre Dame effectively said to Georgia. And Notre Dame played it perfectly, and Georgia essentially played right into their hands, because Georgia couldn't do the same to Notre Dame, because Gunnar Stockton is a quarterback that, again, doesn't have the experience, would not be able to circumvent Notre Dame's defense in multiple different ways. Gunnar Stockton really had to focus on a few plays, a few concepts, and a few styles of play, really one style of play, in order to beat Notre Dame, and Notre Dame just had way more tools in their skill set. It was consistent dominance from Notre Dame, and that's what's so impressive to me. It was consistent dominance. They had a few pop plays. They had a few flashy plays, a few flashy sequences. Of course, all at the end of the game where they had the substitution trick on Kirby Smart, and that worked. You could argue that's a gimmick that led to them winning. You could argue that at the end of the first half, the beginning of the second half, right? They have the fumble recovery, leads to a score. They have the kickoff return for a touchdown. They score what was it, 13 points in like 50 seconds, something like that, 50 seconds of game time when you count that kickoff return touchdown, and that's true, and that's fantastic for Notre Dame, right? And you could argue that those are gimmicky, fluke plays, but I think that even if that's true, if you watch this game and you watch every single play and you watch every single down, Notre Dame consistently dominated Georgia and absolutely deserved the victory. They won the turnover battle. Georgia may have had more big plays. Stockton did, at the end of the day, outthrow Riley Leonard, and it wasn't even close. Now, partially that was because Riley Leonard wasn't entirely focused on throwing the ball downfield, and that hasn't been his strong suit or his focus all year. But Georgia just couldn't maintain and finish drives like Notre Dame could. Notre Dame, when they have the ball, right, largely are not making mistakes. They didn't turn the ball over once, right? They're marching down the field, whether it's with Love or whether it's with Leonard. They're marching their way down the field, and they're at least picking up 3 points. And sure, there were plenty of punts, and these two teams traded punts throughout this game, but Notre Dame didn't need to be scoring every single drive because Georgia was not going to be scoring every single drive because they couldn't maintain drives the same way Notre Dame could. When Georgia would have a big pop play 40 yards down the field, right, to Arian Smith or whoever Garner Stockton was throwing to in a given situation, great. You have this 40-yard completion, but you still need 3 more first downs before you're in the red zone, and Georgia just could not pick up those 3 first downs. Notre Dame played fantastic defense. Again, flustering Gunnar Stockton, and then the second Gunnar Stockton has a break to potentially throw the ball down the field. That's when he realizes that he doesn't have receivers to throw to because of how well Notre Dame is defending them. In that way as well, I thought Notre Dame on defense completely thwarted the Georgia offense. I thought Notre Dame on offense, they didn't even win the way they typically win. They didn't even dominate Georgia the same way they dominated Indiana. They did it in a different way, which is very encouraging to me moving forward. And I think Marcus Freeman outcoached Kirby Smart because I think Kirby Smart, and sure, Kirby Smart had less that he was working with because he had a backup quarterback in and he had to navigate that situation. But Notre Dame, that substitution trick play moment, I think is a great example of Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman outcoaching Kirby Smart. And I think that throughout the game, Marcus Freeman knew how to use his players better than Kirby Smart knew how to use his players to take out the other team, and that's exactly what happened. Consistent dominance from Notre Dame. They knock off Georgia. And looking forward in the tournament, right, they play Penn State and I believe the Orange Bowl next up in the semifinals. They're potentially on a crash course for an Ohio State-Notre Dame national championship game because I'm not certain, but I'm confident Notre Dame is favored against Penn State, and I'm confident that Ohio State is favored against Texas. And even if they're not, I don't think Texas is going to be the team that stops Ohio State, right? Texas, to me, is, we'll talk about the College Football Playoff semifinals later in this episode, but to me, Texas is a team that they're the shakiest out of the Final Four. They're the least strong, least confident out of the Final Four. And Ohio State has just been rolling people and rolling some of the best teams in the country so far in this tournament. So we may be in a crash course for an Ohio State versus Notre Dame national championship game. It was the way that Notre Dame won this game, how consistently dominant they were on every single facet of the game, right? Defense, offense, special teams, coaching. Notre Dame was better in every single way. They won this game with so much conviction, and that's what makes me feel like they're capable of winning it all because they can win games moving forward the same way that they won them this time. The only team that I feel like maybe Notre Dame would have a very small chance against would be, of course, Ohio State. But Drew Aller, right? He's a quarterback that very much can be taken advantage of. Quinn Ewers, I feel like, very much can be taken advantage of. I think if Notre Dame plays Texas, Arch Manning is playing in the fourth quarter. That's a crazy thing to say, but Notre Dame, I think, just has that ability on offense to younger quarterbacks, to inexperienced quarterbacks, weaker quarterbacks without as much talent. It's going to take someone like Will Howard or Dylan Gabriel, and now that Dylan Gabriel's out, it's going to take someone like Will Howard to really dissect this Notre Dame defense. I think Notre Dame is fully capable of winning it all. I think that this win over Georgia was very impressive, and I'm very excited to see if they can keep it up against Penn State in a couple days because this might be the best Notre Dame team that we've seen in a very long time. All right, let's talk about the Colts. Not everyone's a Notre Dame fan, but a decent amount of people in Indiana, a decent amount of people watching this show are Colts fans. They won. They beat the Jaguars 26-23 in overtime. But the big picture for the Colts is very grim, in my opinion. I realized very quickly as we turned this game on just how little I cared, right? First couple drives, just realized how little I cared about the game and the results of it and how the players were. It was Week 18. We're playing with 2 eliminated teams from the playoffs. Jaguars weren't even close. 2 backup quarterbacks. The fans seemed to be more concerned about chanting "Fire Ballard" than the outcome of the game, which honestly I totally understand. I wasn't there, but I'm sure if I was, I would be at least considering joining in the jeers there. But the Colts won. They won 26-23 in overtime at home to finish the season 8-9. That's something that sounds very familiar, although typically it's a loss at the end of the year to miss the playoffs and finish 9-8. Now it's 8-9. We'll win 8 or 9 games, it feels like, until the end of time because this string is just continuing and continuing. So typically when we have a game breakdown like this, we'll talk about the offense, talk about the defense, talk about how the Colts won, how the Colts lost, what it means. But this game is different because, again, we don't really care about the Colts-Jaguars game. across the board. What I did think was interesting is I want to point out which Colts played well, and I want to point out which Colts led to this victory, and really I want to point out which Colts, if Indianapolis were to clean house, who would we still want around, right? Who in this game clearly showed that they deserved to can remain on this team. The number one for me is Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce was targeted twice by Joe Flacco. Both times he caught the football for a total of 57 yards and a touchdown. So not a lot of opportunities for Alec Pierce, but he really made the most of them. And Alec Pierce has sort of become that true deep threat target for the Colts, especially when paired with Joe Flacco, and not Joe Flacco specifically, but rather specifically paired with a quarterback that can throw the football to him. Joe Flacco is by no means an elite quarterback in the NFL, and we know that because he's a backup quarterback in the NFL. But Anthony Richardson, his strength is not necessarily throwing the ball down the field all the time, right? He's more of a dual threat guy. His completion percentage is less than 50%, or at least has been for most of the year. But when Anthony Richardson comes out and Joe Flacco comes in, and whether that's good or bad for the entire team as a whole, Joe Flacco can get the ball to Alec Pierce, and he can push the pace, and he can push the ball down the field. And we saw that on the very first drive of the game where Alec Pierce had his first big-time reception, and that was where he had his touchdown. So to me, in my opinion, this receiving core for the Colts is fantastic, and I think we should keep it exactly how it is, and I think we need to have a capable quarterback in there to take advantage of their prime years, because Alec Pierce is young, and he's a fantastic deep threat target. Michael Pittman Jr. is young, although he's a little bit more on the older side, and he's been great as a big body receiver as well. Josh Downs, fantastic, right? I think this receiver room, and A.D. Mitchell as well, similar. Speedy, shifty, same as Josh Downs. I feel like this receiving core is exactly what we need it to be moving forward, and I want to see it retained. Now, Alec Pierce, best game out of any of them in this past game against the Jaguars. He's been great paired with Joe Flacco. I don't know if Anthony Richardson is going to be the answer in terms of maximizing his receiver talent, which is why I'm a little bit concerned, because I feel like we need a quarterback like Joe Flacco in there. I haven't fully thought out that point, and that's why I haven't fully said anything about it yet. But the reason why we don't really need necessarily a running quarterback or a quarterback that can run like Anthony Richardson is because Jonathan Taylor also had a great game against Jacksonville as well. He had 34 carries for 177 yards and a touchdown, another great showing since that Broncos game. So ever since he dropped the ball at the goal line against the Broncos, Jonathan Taylor has been stellar. I think he's rounded out the season very well, and I think we should work to keep him on this team if we can. Alec Pierce, fantastic. Jonathan Taylor, fantastic. Josh Downs and Michael Pittman Jr. both produced as well. I really have a lot of hope for the future when it comes to this receiving room. The question to me now is, we talked about the receivers and the running backs effectively, right? Jonathan Taylor was great, and this receiving room was great, particularly Alec Pierce. But the question to me is, what undeniably needs to be fixed ahead of 2024 when it comes to roster talent, when it comes to the composition of the coaching staff? What undeniably needs to be fixed? What undeniably needs to change? The secondary to me is the first one. Really the defense as a whole, but mainly the secondary. And I understand that the secondary was injured for most of the year and even injured in this game. Juju Brents went down in week 1. He missed the entire year. He comes back and gets injured again. And whether or not that's going to be a severe injury, we're unsure about. It doesn't really matter because we have a 6-month-long offseason ahead of us. But the secondary, this is the secondary that got torched by Drew Lock, right? And let the Giants put up 40 points on them, and they're a team that typically scores around 14, and let up 225 yards to Mac Jones. So Mac Jones had 225 yards through the air in this game. And it wasn't really about the flashy numbers this time in the Jacksonville game. The Giants game, absolutely, it was the flashy numbers. The numbers Drew Lock and Malik Neighbors and this entire Giants offense put on the board were very alarming and concerning. The Jaguars, it wasn't as much about the flashy numbers. The 225 yards was not what concerned me about the Jaguars. It was how consistently there was open space for Jones to hit on third downs and some of those critical downs, those second and longs, right? Second and long, third and anything, right, or in the red zone. It felt like the Jaguars really just had tons of space, and those receivers were creating a ton of separation. And whether it was the Colts playing zone defense in situations where they might have to play man, or maybe it was man and they were just getting beat, Mac Jones, by the way, keep in mind the name of that quarterback, had plenty of space and plenty of time to hit those receivers across the board. This game never should have been the shootout that it was. It was really an overtime thriller in Week 18 in a situation where the Colts should not be in because the Jaguars were 4-12 and now 4-13 after the loss. This game should never have been as close, and the Jaguars should never have been as competitive as they were. And I think that their offense easily could have been stalled if the Colts secondary just clamped down a little harder on third down or second and long to set up a third and long, right? That's what it felt like to me. And the Jaguars aren't a great team. They aren't a great offense, right? They only put 23 on the board, even going into overtime, right? But the Jaguars, man, I mean, Mac Jones had plenty of opportunities on third downs, and he had plenty of opportunities across the board. The main thing for me is leadership at the top, right? And that obviously, I shouldn't say for me, because that's the main thing to everybody, is the thought of the leadership at the top needing to change. I'm not sure if that's actually going to happen. The big four is Gus Bradley, Shane Steichen, Chris Ballard, and Anthony Richardson. There are no order there. Those are four outside of Jim Irsay, arguably the four most important people in the Colts organization. And the question is, how many of them should be returning for 2025 and how many of them will be returning for 2025, right? Gus Bradley, more than likely, is going to be out as defensive coordinator. I have no idea who the Colts are going to replace him with, but this defense, as evidenced by really just the last few weeks, was not up to par, right? Gus Bradley is putting a defense on the field that lets up 30 to Denver, lets up over 30 to Tennessee, lets up over 40 to the New York Giants, and lets up over 20 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's disastrous, right? And Gus Bradley likely is going to have to be out at defensive coordinator for the Colts. Steichen may stay, given his short tenure, right? Steichen hasn't been in Indianapolis for very long. If this was year 5 or 6, Steichen's gone. But this is year 2 or 3, right? So Shane Steichen likely will be given a couple more chances, a couple more seasons to really get the Colts moving in the right direction. And if he's unable to do that, then maybe the Colts are going to make a change. Whether or not that is actually what should be occurring is up for people to debate. And I may make a video, I may make a segment about this in a couple of days, in a couple of weeks. But Ballard should be theoretically in trouble. Steichen could be in trouble. What really is the most alarming thing from yesterday was Jim Irsay's message. He made a statement. I saw it on Instagram. I don't know where all it was, to be honest. I don't know where this went out, but I know it was on social media. Jim Irsay released a statement indicating that he still had optimism, and the quote is that he still believed in Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard. I wish I had it up with me so I could read it off to you, but it's very easy to find if you haven't seen it already. Jim Irsay released a statement effectively saying that he believed in Chris Ballard and believed in Shane Steichen and that they were both going to remain filling their positions for the Indianapolis Colts. He said that people that were expecting major leadership change would be disappointed. They may be disappointed, right, is what he said. That's not a direct quote. It's paraphrasing. But still, effectively, the point was that Chris Ballard's going to stay there. Shane Steichen's going to stay there. He did not point out Gus Bradley by name, which makes me think that he's going to be gone, which will be a good thing for the Indianapolis Colts. But Chris Ballard, he's probably going to stay. Shane Steichen, probably going to stay. I imagine that implies that Anthony Richardson is also going to stay. So we're going to go through the draft. We're going to go through free agency, and we're going to reload for 2025. And I imagine that the Colts are not going to improve much off of their showing from 2024, because if it was bad multiple years in a row, how are you going to make it good if you don't make changes? I don't think Jim Irsay is willing to make changes. That is a disaster to me. And I'm very excited to monitor this situation and talk about it and speak on it throughout the offseason, because we have a long offseason ahead of us before what I hope is not a long season for fans. All right. Indiana, really, at this point, is being saved by the Pacers, right? The Colts, we just talked about how disastrous they have been. And how disastrous it seems like they're going to continue to be. But the Pacers have made it back to 500. And while the football season is in the offseason, the Pacers are going to continue to play good basketball. The Pacers, to me, are back. They're back. They're better than ever. They picked up 2 critical weekend wins over teams that they would, a few weeks ago, have no hope against, right? They knocked off the Suns, and they knocked off the Heat on, I believe, Thursday and Sunday were the days of those games. Regardless, this past weekend, beat the Heat on the road, beat the Suns at home. A few key players are back from injury. Andrew Nembhard, most notably. The stars, Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam, are absolutely shining. And the expansion of the win column is evidence of exactly that. Against Miami, the Pacers lit it up from around the perimeter, right? They had 17 threes. They're 8-2 when they hit at least 15 three-pointers. Tyrese Halliburton, he had a strong start, a consistently impressive performance, 33 points, 5 rebounds, 15 assists. I will say, this Miami game, I want to take with a grain of salt because the Jimmy Butler drama hit its peak after the Pacers game. He put up 9 points against the Pacers and then requested a trade in the press conference after. So there's clearly dysfunction in Miami, and there's clearly drama in Miami that's potentially distracting players, coaches, attracting fans. But it was still an impressive road win for the Pacers to appreciate, and one that, again, a few weeks ago, the Pacers would probably be losing by more than 10 to the Heat on the road. Major road win against a rival. Pick it up, move forward. And I was actually in attendance for the in-season tournament game where the Heat came to Indianapolis, and the Pacers did not look good. They looked sloppy. It was a disaster. But they pick up a win on the road against Miami and then parlay that into a win over Phoenix as well. And this win, to me, was much more impressive and the gold star of the weekend. The team, prior to this game, hadn't won at home since December 15th. They finally pick up a home win. It was, January 5th? They finally pick up a home win over Kevin Durant and a playoff-bound Suns team. This game showed how much better this team is, especially defensively, now that Andrew Nembhard has returned to the lineup. They dominated the boards. They out-rebounded Phoenix by 10, while Miles Turner swatted down 3 shots. So Turner had 3 blocks. The team out-rebounded Phoenix by 10. Phoenix has never really had a strong front court, but still, Pacers keeping up the quality play for all 4 quarters, right? Also defensively, primarily around the perimeter, Andrew Nembhard returns. Kevin Durant and Devin Booker were both held to under 30. Last time these two teams played, Kevin Durant had 37 points. Indiana truly playing fantastic defense across the floor, taking care of the basketball, and Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam primarily are just turning up offensively, right? They're just going to, so Pacers playing fantastic defense, taking care of the basketball, and then Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam are doing exactly what they need to do to keep this team moving in the right direction. It's been a recipe for success, and the Pacers have won 8 of their last 11, including wins over playoff teams. The Suns will more than likely be in the Western Conference playoffs. The Heat are a bit more of a question, but they will more than likely be, they're at least right now in contention. They're in the range of the playoffs for the Eastern Conference. Great defense, taking care of the basketball, and those stars, namely Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam, are absolutely shining, and that is how the Pacers are continuing to win basketball games, and it's something that is very impressive to me across the board. Now, the question is, what's so different now, right? What changed? Why were the Pacers playing like one of the worst teams in the league, one of the worst teams in the East, and now playing like one of the best ones? Number one, Andrew Nembhard is back, and he is clearly a significant piece defensively and even offensively for the Pacers. The best thing about Andrew Nembhard is he can effectively put him one-on-one with any star player on the opposing team. You look at Kevin Durant, you look at Devin Booker, you look at Damian Lillard, right? Great one. Damian Lillard was shut up in the Bucks win over the Pacers. And Andrew Nembhard, he won't be able to take them out of the game, right? He won't be able to completely counteract, completely cancel out their effect, but he will be able to at least decrease their production and significantly limit their production and make them have to work significantly harder to put points on the board and get assists going and grab rebounds. Andrew Nembhard, defensively in the backcourt, is undeniably one of the most quality pieces on this Pacers team. He's been doing great. Tyrese Halliburton, he's seemingly out of his slump. He's producing at a high level himself. The Pacers across the board are rolling, and they got to ride this momentum, to continued win streaks. They've won 8 of their last 11. They went through a little bumpy stretch when they had to go to Boston twice, and they played the Thunder at home just a couple days prior. But the Pacers are rolling, right? They've been winning. They have to continue to win. They are 8th in the East right now at 18-18. They just got back to 500 finally on the year. I hope they can keep it. They're 8th in the East, but half a game separates them and the 3 teams above them, Atlanta, Miami, and Milwaukee. So in one day, right? Today is Monday. Tonight, so I should preface this before we get too far ahead of ourselves. It's Monday morning right now as I'm recording this. The Pacers go to Brooklyn to play the Nets tonight on Monday evening. This episode will likely come out on Tuesday morning. So I am recording without the context of understanding what happened against the Nets. I'm assuming it was a routine victory. I'm assuming that everything we've seen go well for the Pacers so far is what will occur against the Nets as well. But the Bucks play the Raptors on the same day. The Heat play the Kings that late night game on NBA TV. So all in a span of 2 days. If those three teams lose and the Pacers win, then the Pacers just casually slide into the 5 slot at this point in the year. Of course, there's a ton of time still to go in the NBA season, but the Pacers are right where they want to be. They're 8th. They're 18-18. They are on a win streak. They are rolling, and other teams maybe aren't quite performing at that level at this moment. They're going to be able to slide up the standings if they continue to pick up wins, and they have a few great opportunities to do so in the near future. The Pacers host the Chicago Bulls on Wednesday. They're seeking revenge for a recent loss to Chicago. And then on Friday, they host the Golden State Warriors following a recent win over them. So the Bulls, winnable game. The Warriors, they recently took them down. That's a winnable game as well. And then on Sunday, they go to Cleveland. That's a division rival that they haven't played yet. So the Cleveland Cavaliers, number 1 in the East, division rival, right? Number 1 in their division, number 1 in the entire conference. But the Pacers haven't played the Cavaliers yet this season. The Pacers won that game in the in-season tournament group play last year. The Cavaliers are a different level right now. They're playing at a different level of quality, a different level of efficiency. Right now, I believe they only have 4 losses on the year. The Cavaliers are incredible, no matter which way you slice it. And I'm looking forward to seeing if the Pacers are able to pick up a win there. But they have 2 tune-up games, and I hesitate to call the Warriors a tune-up game. But they have 2 games at home, the Bulls and the Warriors, to sort of ramp up a win streak, go into the Cavaliers game having won 4 in a row, and then potentially being able to make it a 5th in that game. There's a lot of great opportunities moving forward, and there's a lot of teams. The middle of the playoff range of the East is very, very convoluted, right? Between the Bucks, between the Heat, between the Hawks, and between the Pacers, it's all very close. Those 4 teams separated by half a game. That's 5th through 8th, all separated by just half a game. And below them, there's even another pack of the Pistons and the 76ers and some of those teams down there that the Pacers could potentially be in contention with and were in contention with when they were losing more consistently. But now, the Pacers are back. They're winning. Again, the stars are shining. They're playing great defense. They're taking care of the basketball. Andrew Nembhard is back and better than ever. And the Pacers are in position with these 3 games this next week to ramp themselves up to a spot and to a position where they're 5th in the East, they're 6th in the East, and they're contending against some of these top teams. They beat the Celtics on the road. They had the opportunity to beat the Cleveland Cavaliers on the road to then have picked up 2 wins, really 3 wins because they beat the Celtics twice. 2 wins over the top 2 teams in the East and prove that they're capable of beating anyone. And as they continue to ramp up that momentum, there's really no telling where the Pacers are going to stop and how high the Pacers can fly moving forward. And as we prepare for the Bulls on Wednesday, I'm very excited to watch it all play out. Okay, I want to talk about Indiana basketball. Indiana, this past weekend, really bolstered their NCAA tournament resume. They at least kicked off their opportunities to bolster their NCAA tournament resume. They had a great weekend. Conference play is back. Winter break is almost over. They beat Rutgers at home by 10, and then at the Palestra, they beat Penn State by 6. I'm going to talk about each of these games individually first. The Rutgers game, my first thought in mind is that I'm surprised that they only won by 10. At home in a conference game, Rutgers, they were without Dylan Harper, but Ace Bailey did put up 39 points in his stead. Indiana pulled together and won the game as a team, and that's the thing that's most encouraging to me about the Hoosiers in this last game, because the majority of their production, the majority of their starting 5, the majority of their relevant roster, perhaps, is transfers, right? Indiana filled with transfers. Omar Ballo, a transfer. Goody, transfer, right? Plenty of Indiana Hoosiers on this team are transfers. So it was great to see them win this game as a team. Sometimes when you see transfer teams like this and transfer rosters, you require one player a night to show out and put up 39 like Ace Bailey did. Ace Bailey put up 39, and the Indiana Hoosiers basketball team was able to outpace that mark from the Scarlet Knights. The team was fantastic from three-point range. They turned defense into offense, and that is really the complementary work that I was encouraged to see from the Hoosiers, right? It's one thing to have a lot of great players assorted on a team. It's another thing to have a great basketball team. And I was worried that Indiana was going to be an assortment of good basketball players. But Indiana, right, defensively, they're forcing turnovers, they're grabbing rebounds, and they're pushing the pace, and they're tossing the ball to the other side of the floor. And then the offense, a different set of players, they're able to put the ball in the basket. It's a consistent, compatible group of players, and they won a game that they really, in my opinion, had to, because Indiana doesn't have very many quality wins on the year. Penn State was really their first one. At the time when they played Rutgers, I would argue Indiana didn't have any true quality wins on their resume so far. So to pick up a bad loss at home would be devastating. But they survive. They win by 10. It's a conference game, very difficult. But at home against Rutgers, they won by double digits. And sure, Rutgers didn't have freshman Dylan Harper, but across the board, Indiana, the team, played well, and they played well together. That consistent, compatible group of players very much impressed me against Rutgers. And then my question after that point was whether or not they could continue that and maintain that going into the game against Penn State. And the Penn State win, to me, was even more impressive, right? And that was really their first major win on the year, their first major road win for sure. They're at the Palestra, a historic venue. It's effectively a Penn State home game, right? Omar Ballo had another double-double with 25 points and 13 rebounds. He's been dominating the paint, and that's opened up the floor quite a bit for the Hoosiers, where you have Omar Ballo down low, and he's grabbing rebounds. He has the size and the strength to outbox anybody in between the blocks. And he's been doing that, right? Omar Ballo has been doing everything down low, and he's really kept Indiana afloat. He's the anchor of this offense and defense for the Hoosiers. They were able to hold off a late surge from Penn State towards the end of the game. You're watching, and you think it's over, and then you start to wonder if maybe Penn State has a little bit more in the tank, but Indiana was able to hold them off across the board. It's the first gold star on the Hoosiers' resume so far this season, and that's very, very important because as Indiana went to the Bahamas and they went 1-2, right, and they got blown away by Louisville and they got blown away by Gonzaga, I started to wonder whether or not Indiana was truly the NCAA tournament quality team that we thought they were. But then, now we're in conference play. Indiana in the Big Ten picks up a couple big wins. They knock off Rutgers. They go on the road effectively at the Palestra and beat Penn State. And now you're starting to think, okay, Indiana can win over some quality teams, which is not something that we for sure could have said earlier on in the year. So as they continue to pick up those big wins, their resume is going to be boosted, and we're going to see if Indiana is, under Mike Woodston, the NCAA tournament team that we thought they would be in the 2024-25 season. Now, Malik Reneau did get hurt. Malik Reneau was injured. He went down against Rutgers. Mike Woodson, head coach, said he's not coming back anytime soon, was the quote. He had a lower body injury against the Scarlet Knights. This, in my opinion, is very alarming and very significant. And if we just talked about how Indiana's looking to bolster their NCAA tournament resume moving forward, but losing Malik Reneau, I think, would massively hurt their chances of making and doing anything in the NCAA tournament. He really keeps this team afloat and presentable in certain spots, right? 14 points per game, but the main quality piece and the quality aspect of Malik Reneau is how he comes up in big-time moments. His best games are against the best opponents that they face. He had 24 against Gonzaga. He had 33 against Louisville, 20 at Nebraska. He keeps this team afloat, and he keeps them if they're getting blown away, Malik Reneau keeps this team presentable. He saves a lot of face for this Hoosiers basketball team, and he keeps the team afloat. He keeps the team in contention. He keeps the team in games, and I would expect that if Indiana was ever gets a top 25 team, and they will be in a couple weeks against Illinois, they're going to miss Malik Reneau's ability to take over the game, right? And they're going to miss Malik Reneau's abilities across the board. Certain games fall by the wayside, and again, Malik Reneau keeps them in it. The Hoosiers are going to struggle without Malik Reneau quite a bit. The question then, moving forward after that, is who's going to replace his production, right? Who's going to look at the loss of Malik Reneau and say, okay, it's my turn to step up, right? The Indiana has been doing a pretty good job of replacing him so far, replacing his production at least so far. No one is likely to match it quite in the same way that Malik Reneau can. Amar Ballo is the guy that typically comes off the bench, but started against Penn State, and he excelled. He had a double-double, 25 points, 13 rebounds. He was a leading scorer for the team. Amar Ballo comes off the bench and balls out. Now, very much so, Malik Reneau and Omar Ballo are different styles of players. Luke Goody, is a guy that did a decent job as a player more similar to Renaud. Naturally, with Renaud getting hurt, he's not only going to have 0 minutes, and there's going to be more minutes for Goody and some of these other players to put on the board, but also Malik Renaud, the time of the basketball in his hands is now reduced to 0, and other players are, of course, going to have to take the mantle in those moments. Instead, Luke Goody, he had 12 and 7. Mbako had 20 and 4. Indiana, their forwards, their guards, and of course Amar Ballo, that anchor center, they've been doing all right so far without Malik Renaud. We're going to see how this starting five shifts. I imagine it's going to be the exact same, just with Omar Ballo in the lineup instead of Renaud. The question is whether or not they can keep it up, right? Is Indiana, without Malik Renaud, still going to be able to produce at a high level and score at a high level? Because they had over 75 in 2 games in a row. Effectively, with both of them without Malik Renaud, they at least finished both games without Renaud. They've been doing okay so far, which is encouraging. And my hope is that anytime soon still could mean this year, and Malik Renaud could potentially be back for March. Because if this team figures out how to click without him and they figure out how to start winning without him, when they insert him back into this lineup, that's when Indiana could flash and become that Sweet 16 Elite 8 Final Four quality team that we hope they could be. Malik Renaud got hurt. Indiana is going to massively struggle without him, but they've been doing okay so far. They picked up 2 wins without him, and they're looking forward to the next week and the opportunities that it will have in store for them. On Wednesday, the Hoosiers are going to host USC, and coming up on Saturday, they travel to Iowa. So those are 2 tune-up games ahead and 2 important conference tests at a similar level of difficulty as these past 2 against Rutgers and Penn State. 2 important conference tests as they ramp up for Illinois. They play Illinois at home on January 14th. Illinois right now, I believe, is the number 22 team in the country. We will see how that changes today when the AP poll is updated. But top 25 team, Illinois, one of the best teams in the conference, definitely going to be in the NCAA tournament, rather, as we get to that point. January 14th at home, Indiana faces Illinois. Before that, they have USC on Wednesday and Iowa on Saturday. So in between now and the next time we record, next time a podcast comes out, it should be on Thursday. Indiana will have played USC. We'll talk about that. The Pacers will have played the Bulls. We'll talk about that. But especially without Renaud, right? Especially without Malik Renaud, this Illinois game is going to be a massive opportunity for them to not only extend their win streak to as much as 5, because a win over Rutgers and then a win over Penn State and then a win over USC and Iowa would set them up to extend a win streak to 5 if they beat Illinois and, of course, take care of business in the couple games before that. And that would be what proves to the world that they're a legitimate contender in the Big Ten and in the country. This season and everything involved with it is getting very real very quickly for the Indiana Hoosiers, and I'm looking forward to seeing if they can continue this 2-game win streak to 3, to 4, and to 5 in one big-time game on January 14th. Regardless, they lose Malik Renaud, but they pick up a couple of big wins, and they're doing okay without their star player, knowing that they have much more difficult tasks ahead of them. Okay, that's all I have on Indiana. I want to talk about the College Football Playoff. And I'm a little late, I suppose, to talk about the quarterfinals of the College Football Playoff. Next episode, we'll talk a little bit more about the NFL. Overall, the quarterfinals of the College Football Playoff were very fun. It was a fun round. None of these games were truly boring. All of them had intriguing storylines, involved with them going in. Those were accentuated by the games as they played out. Penn State played Boise State. Right? Penn State won. Penn State was better across the board. They had better athletes, and it showed. Boise State just simply isn't on this level. They aren't on the College Football Playoff quarterfinal level, and this makes me wish that, because, sure, 12 teams, Boise State deserved to be in there, right? They were ranked in the top 12. They did not steal a bid like Arizona State did, perhaps. Boise State, or Clemson, rather, is another good one. Boise State, to me, just isn't ready, and they're not at this level. They don't recruit this well. They don't battle test this well. Ashton Jeanty is fantastic, but other than that, there isn't really much special about this Boise State team, at least relative to a team like Penn State. Penn State was better. They were just better athletes, and it showed. I didn't think that Boise State was fully prepared for this task and this test. It was a great season for Boise, right? But likely not one that can be repeated. Ashton Jeanty is going to go to the NFL. He was the lifeblood of Boise State's success, and their success should likely disappear with him. This was fun while it lasted, though. Boise State, great story. They almost beat Oregon. That would have been incredible. That was during Oregon's sort of down stretch at the beginning of the year, which maybe wasn't as much of a moment in time down stretch as we just saw what happened to them against Ohio State. We'll talk about that a little later. Boise State, great season. A group of 5 team has to make the college football playoff every year, so maybe Boise State can round into form and do it again. I just don't think so, because I think Ashton Jeanty took up too much of their opportunities for success. So as he leaves, I think Boise State's playoff runs will leave with him, at least for the time being. On the other side, Penn State, they never made the 14 playoff, right? Never did it. They were always fantastic. They were always the third best team in the Big Ten, and they, at least usually the third best team in the Big Ten, but they can never break through and make the college football playoff when there were 4 teams that could qualify for it, or at least be selected for it. But now they had a fantastic draw. They lose to Oregon, and then they have to play SMU at home and then play Boise State at a neutral site. Those 2 games were arguably easy, right? It was a very, very workable stretch. It was a very it was a stretch. It was a run to the semifinals that was very easy to navigate, and Penn State, without a doubt, navigated it. And now they find themselves in the semifinals. They're going to play Notre Dame. Now they have to do it against a stronger opponent. James Franklin has already cemented the idea that this Penn State season is better. This Penn State team is better than those in years past. This is already a better Penn State season than in years past. They're in the semifinals. That's something they've never done before. But they haven't beaten a quality opponent yet to get there. Now is their opportunity to do that. And they played Notre Dame, and it's going to be a very thrilling game in the Orange Bowl, in my opinion. The much better semifinal compared to Ohio State, Texas. Although we've got a very good set of semifinal games between the two. Penn State, they've elevated already, but now it's time to emphasize and put a period on this season, whether they win the championship or not. Getting there over Notre Dame in the semifinals on this historic run for the school would be absolutely fantastic. Texas beat Arizona State. This game was a thrill. Oh my goodness, this game was a thrill. The first game of the day on New Year's Day. Cam Scatterbo absolutely gave the Sun Devils a chance. Arizona State, they're revamping as a program. They moved to the Big 12. They're I don't want to say rebuilding, but they're revamping their program. Kenny Dillingham has done a fantastic job there. This game, to me, put them on the map, because Cam Scatterbo is a very polarizing figure. He's a very polarizing personality. And Arizona State in this moment was, in my opinion, put on the map by this loss in overtime to Texas, because they almost won it. And we could be talking about a semifinals that involve Cam Scatterbo and Arizona State versus Ohio State. And although that may have very well turned into a bloodbath, Arizona State put themselves on the map. That's going to help their recruiting. That's going to help them in the transfer portal. Kenny Dillingham is really revamping this program and making Arizona State potentially a mainstay at the top of the Big 12 and a mainstay in the college football playoff conversation. I look forward to seeing if Kenny Dillingham, if he stays, how he will be able to continue to rebuild Arizona State and make them a frequent college football playoff contender and a team that frequently makes it there, wins Big 12 championships. It continues to win Big 12 championships. Of course, they did it over Iowa State just a couple weeks ago. Arizona State, they're moving up, and this loss, but this competitive game in the college football playoff really put them on the map, and I'm excited to see what they're able to do in the future. Texas, to me, is the shakiest team in the tournament. I'm not confident. I think Quinn Ewers is probably the least impressive quarterback right now left in the semifinals. I think Texas's roster is the shakiest. They lost in overtime to Georgia with Gunnar Stockton. Georgia's now out, right? Notre Dame dominated them. Texas is going to have to go up to Ohio State, which may very well be a buzzsaw. They just annihilated Oregon, right? I am nervous about Texas, and I don't anticipate Texas doing much more in the college football playoff. Picked up some wins over some inferior opponents, right? Beat Clemson at home, beat Arizona State. But after that, I don't think Texas is going to be capable of much. I say that, and they're going to beat Ohio State and win a national championship. But Texas, to me, is the shakiest team, and I think that how close this game against Arizona State was really proves that. Ohio State, on the other hand, destroyed Oregon, right? Much of the world's surprise, Ohio State dominated Oregon. Oregon, to me, isn't ready yet. Oregon reminds me of Georgia from a few years ago, where Georgia couldn't get past Alabama, and I talked about this on a couple episodes ago. Georgia just couldn't get past Alabama, right, with Kirby Smart. They were great. They were fantastic. They had nearly undefeated years. They had 1-loss seasons, maybe a 2-loss season, undefeated seasons as well. And Georgia would put themselves in the position in the SEC Championship or the College Football Playoff to knock off Alabama, and they would lose. Or it was LSU in 2019, where Georgia would just get set back by Alabama, LSU, whoever the top dog in the SEC was, and Georgia couldn't break through until 2021 with that Keely Ringo walk-off interception, and all of a sudden Georgia is a national champion, and Georgia is the number one program and number one team in the SEC, and all of a sudden they're recruiting much better than Alabama is, and then Nick Saban retires, and now Georgia is the team in the SEC to beat. Right now, it has been Ohio State and Michigan, right? Oregon all of a sudden enters the Big Ten, wins the Big Ten, and is pushing for a national championship as the number one seed, and they get blown away by Ohio State. And I don't think it's a knock on Dan Lanning or a knock on the Ducks as a whole. I just think that they're not ready yet, and I just think that they need a couple more years. And although they're going to lose Dylan Gabriel, they're going to lose a lot of talent, they're going to be able to reload very effectively, and I think Oregon's in a position to work themselves up to a national championship. It's very difficult in college football. Maybe not the same in college basketball, but it's very difficult in college football to just put together a great team. And I know Oregon has been ramping up to this point, but still, it's very difficult to just put yourself in a new environment like the Big Ten, for example, and just go win a national championship, especially with a 12-team playoff where you're going to have to win at least 3 games to win it all. Oregon, in my opinion, just isn't ready. Ohio State is ready, and it might be their year, right? They haven't won a championship in, I suppose, the modern era is what we would call it. Ryan Day hasn't gotten it done. Could this finally be their year? For Ryan Day and the Buckeyes, they destroyed Tennessee. They dominated Oregon. Tennessee's a fantastic team. Oregon was the best team in the country prior to that game. Ohio State, the 8 seed, the lowest seeded team in this tournament, potentially, that's still remaining, rather. The lowest seeded team in this tournament that's still in it potentially could be pushing for a national championship. It could finally be the year for Ryan Day and the Buckeyes. I'm just interested to see if they're able to keep this going against Texas. I think they will. And then in the national championship game, can they win one more big one over Notre Dame or Penn State in order to finally win it all and completely reverse the conversation about Ryan Day and Ohio State as a whole? Notre Dame, they beat Georgia. We talked about this game earlier in the episode, so I'm not going to say much about it, but Notre Dame outright won, right? They just dominated Oregon, in my opinion. They won on offense, they won on defense, they won on special teams, they won in the coaching battle as well. Georgia had a good season, right? Their overtime thrillers were eventually going to catch up to them. They barely beat Georgia Tech. They barely beat Texas, right? Unfortunate that they had an injury to their quarterback, but eventually they were going to play a stronger opponent, and eventually they were going to play an opponent that matches up better with them, especially knowing Georgia had a backup quarterback, and they lost. For Notre Dame, on the other hand, Marcus Freeman. He's elevated this program to the next level. I don't care that Georgia didn't have a starting quarterback in the game. Still, absolutely, Georgia's a fantastic opponent and a fantastic program and team across the board. There's no telling where Notre Dame could go from here. They could win the national championship, right? If maybe Texas takes care of Ohio State, or Notre Dame just goes head-to-head and beats Ohio State themselves. I think Ohio State will win, and I think Ohio State safely will win it all. But Notre Dame right now, against Penn State, absolutely has a chance and absolutely could put themselves in the national championship. And at that point, all bets are off, and either one of those two teams can win it. There's no telling where Notre Dame can go from here. Even after the season, Marcus Freeman, he's elevated this program. It's a 12-team playoff now. Notre Dame's more than likely going to be in it. They lost to Northern Illinois, still got in and worked their way to the semifinals, right? They may not be able to get a first-round bye, but Notre Dame's going to have a home game. It feels like every single year under Marcus Freeman, and it's eventually they're bound to break through and win a national championship. Does it happen this year? Probably not. But it might happen soon. And when Notre Dame finally gets to the pinnacle of college football, that is when Marcus Freeman is going to be considered one of the best coaches in that school's history and the history of the sport as a whole, in my opinion. Every team with a bye lost in the college football playoff. Every team 1 through 4. Boise State and Arizona State were not favored to win. Oregon and Georgia, but I guess Notre Dame was favored to win for a time as well. But Oregon and Georgia, top 2 seeds. That's how you know that either something is wrong or those two teams just didn't quite have the ability to win a championship this year. Georgia didn't have their starting quarterback. Oregon was new to the college football playoff, right? They were new to this stage. They weren't ready for it, potentially. But still, I feel like it's very possible that having a first-round bye contributed to teams maybe not being in their groove the same way, right? They weren't set up to win it all. They weren't set up to win games just because Notre Dame and Penn State and Ohio State and, Texas, they had another game under their belt, right? They had won against an inferior opponent at home, most likely. They've kept that energy going. They've kept themselves moving forward in the season. And then when they get to the quarterfinals, they're facing a team that maybe is a little bit rusty, maybe hasn't been in the groove as much. Oregon, Georgia, Boise State, Arizona State, they all lose. I don't think that's a coincidence. If it happens again next year, then it's definitely not a coincidence. It's a problem in the NFL, right? One team in each conference gets a bye, and it feels like that number one seed loses every single year, or at least one of them loses every single year. Every team in the college football playoff with a bye and that skipped the first rounds into the quarterfinals lost, and that makes for a very exciting Final Four, really, a very exciting semifinal, because all of these teams are hot, right? All of these teams have won at least 2 games in a row against great teams, playoff caliber teams, top 25 caliber teams. They move forward into the semifinals where they have 2 more teams to take care of. We're not sure who the second team will be, but Notre Dame's got to get past Penn State. Penn State's got to get past Notre Dame. Ohio State and Texas have to get past each other as well. And I'm very excited to see how the semifinals play out. I think Notre Dame will beat Penn State in a close one. I think Ohio State will race past Texas, and I think we'll set up for a Notre Dame versus Ohio State national championship game. A rematch from a couple years ago when, of course, Notre Dame down to the wire in the final moments was unable to take down Ohio State, I believe, in their own building. Fantastic regular season non-conference test for both teams, and a situation now where we could be set up for a crash course for that national championship. But regardless, Notre Dame picked up a win, Penn State picked up a win, Texas picked up a win, Ohio State picked up a win, and it sets us up for a very entertaining semifinal, and I'm very excited to watch it all play out. All right. That's all I have for you guys today. We're going to run up right to an hour, which is very encouraging to me. We talked about Notre Dame. We talked about the Colts, talked about the Pacers. We talked about Indiana basketball. We talked about the College Football Playoff Quarterfinals. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. We'll talk to you again on Thursday. Thursday is the day where we'd be reacting to Indiana playing USC. We'd be reacting to the Pacers playing the Nets and the Bulls in between now and then, at least the moment I'm recording this. And looking forward to the rest of the weekend, right? The Colts offseason is in full swing. Basketball season is at its peak. Notre Dame, we're going to have to preview a game that they play against Penn State. We've got an exciting week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. I look forward to coming back on here again in a couple days. With that said, I will see you all next week, and have a great week in the state of Indiana.